So we have a little housekeeping first, because you guys just gave me a big gut punch with those polls. It's like 4 people thought that big data was a big priority, and then nearly half the audience said they had no plans to do anything with big data. So first of all, the 4 people who have big data as a #1 priority, thank you. At least there's 4 people who'll be interested by this talk. And for the I think it was 90, so I think there were probably 50 people who said they had no plans. Hopefully in the next 20 minutes I can convert one of you to think that this stuff's important. So real quick, GSN, a lot of you know it as a cable TV network where you can see Steve Harvey 24 hours a day. A lot of reruns. We have new programming, original content as well. What I think a lot of people don't know is that we also have hundreds of video games on iOS, Facebook, the web, Android. We have 177 million unique people playing these games across all the platforms. And last year on the iPad, we had the #7 and the #10 top grossing titles of the year, according to Apple. So, we're doing pretty well in the game space. We're certainly not the leader by any stretch. There's this company called Supercell that has 3 titles in the top 10. So if their chief data scientist is somewhere here giving a talk, you should probably listen to him and not me. But about me, I'm a total accidental data scientist. I'm a software engineer. I've just happened to have worked with complex systems that have a lot of data over the last 15, 20 years, whether that's e-commerce, getting people approved for loans, online advertising, did a lot of work with disease surveillance in developing nations. So the common theme for all of that turns out was data, even though I didn't know that until a couple of years ago. And I'm also a terrible parent because I have 4 children under the age of 7 whom I did not bring to Disneyland with me. So if somehow in the future, because I know this is being recorded, my kids stumble upon this, I'm sorry. Also, why are you watching a talk? Go outside and play. This is not something you should be paying attention to. So we're a total accidental big data story. We make games. We did not think of ourselves as a big data company at all. And we basically in 2011 found ourselves with a problem. So we had this app on Facebook called Games by GSN. It's a portal with several dozen little flash games, like Amazing Sheriff, where you launch this little sheriff guy and he lands on planets and spins around. It's a lot of fun. And we did a lot of A/B testing to try to see what games resonated with our players, what business model, should we have ads supported, freemium, virtual currency. So we kind of built this product on the back of A/B testing, split testing. And it worked great, and we sort of grew the product to 100,000 daily active users, which we thought was a big number at the time. And we would separate the users into equal groups and run this battery of queries to look at all of the KPIs for group A, all of the KPIs for group B, and then make a decision of how we wanted to go. It's important to realize this is not, the fitness function for this sort of A/B testing is not a scalar. It's more complex than that, right? We're not just trying to see, like, ad optimization's easy, which ad gets the highest CTR. In this case, we'll have 2 experiences, and we'll look at all the KPIs, and we're literally trying to decide what is our business going to be. So it's much more sort of a decision support tool than just a straight-up optimization. Anyways, things were chugging along, and then almost overnight, we went from 100,000 daily active users to 10 million daily active users, and then all the way up to 18 million. And, it sucked. The queries were so slow. We had done all of this work. We had all these dashboards that had been supporting us for years. And then all of a sudden, they took 24 hours to run the dashboard. Like, you'd hit go, and you'd go home, and you'd come back, and it'd still be running. And then it would, of course, and everybody knows how this works, right? When you have a 24-hour query, it always craps out after 23 hours and 59 minutes, right? So you're like 23... Oh, okay, it's going to finish, No, network error, start again. So this was really frustrating for us. And that's when we discovered column stores. So we piloted Vertica, which you've heard a little bit about. And this is the actual average query time for our A/B dashboard before and after Vertica. And one thing that you might not notice glancing at this is that it's actually on a log scale. So the queries used to take 24 hours, which is 100 million milliseconds. And after we switched to Vertica, those same exact queries returned in 800 milliseconds. So that's 5 orders of magnitude faster, which is just mind-boggling. So we got to continue running our business in the exact same way we had gotten used to, even if we had 18 million daily active users. And that's what kind of turned us into a big data company, completely accidentally. So what I want to do is share 5 little big data stories. And like I said, hopefully by the end of this, one of you 50 people who's like, I don't need big data, will decide, oh, maybe this is interesting. So the first story is about this A/B testing, split testing. And it's a story of, we have this app, it's called GSN Casino. It's got a lot of little mini casino games inside the app. And when we launch a new mini game, we split test it. So half the audience sees it, half the audience doesn't. We measure the results. So we recently introduced this new wheel bingo that the arrow is pointing to. And for the people who were exposed to this game, they had a 12% higher day 3 return rate. They had 7% higher 3-day monetization rates. So the naive reading of this experiment is that the game was successful. However, and this is one of the big themes of big data, what big data lets you do is look at why, not just what. Right? So we have this experiment. We see that these metrics are up. And then when our data science team starts to look into it, it turns out the new game actually wasn't that good. It was, in fact, had a really confusing logo. It clashed with the game on top of it. You actually didn't know what was going on as a player. And so without much context, people went to the next brightest spot and clicked on that, which is that Deal or No Deal. And Deal or No Deal is a phenomenal game. If you've seen the show, it's like totally puts you on edge. Like there's suspense, there's beautiful women opening cases. It's a great game. And so accidentally, by having a crappy logo that confused people, we pushed more of our users into Deal or No Deal, and that's why retention was 12% higher and monetization was 7% higher. So this is a story of, when you're doing A/B testing, you can't just read the results and implement that. We ended up not shipping that wheel bingo game, and instead now when you go to our app, we push you into Deal or No Deal as aggressively as possible. Another story from A/B testing. So we have a game called Wheel of Fortune, which is just like the iconic game show. And how many people know Wheel of Fortune? I don't know okay. Nice. Nice. Our CEO, I need to take a picture of that afterwards. He would be psyched. So Wheel of Fortune, you solve these puzzles. And we were curious. We have 10,000 puzzles that have actually aired on the game show over its 20-some-year run. And we wanted to know what genre of puzzles should we start with. So somebody downloads the app, opens it up. What's the first genre they could see? Culture, travel, thing, food, people. So we split test the audience. And the thing genre is clearly preferred. And food is way down at the bottom. So again, the naive reading of this experiment is that people hate food and love things. But what actually, it turns out, is that the puzzle length was wildly different between these 5 genres. And things had a much shorter average puzzle length than food. The food had these big French 5-word blah, 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 some kind of French thing that I can't pronounce. And the things were just very simple, small puzzles. And so it turns out that what people really were expressing a preference for was short puzzles when they're a first-time player. And in fact, once we learned that, we tried to experiment with things that were not in the Wheel of Fortune canon, that had never appeared on Wheel of Fortune. And we got shorter and shorter and shorter, till now, if you open it up, your first puzzle is going to be something like bird or car. Really, really short puzzles, because that's what players prefer. And so this, again, is a story of how when you're doing an A/B test, you need to look for the why and not just depend on the what. So the third story is big data gone bad. I was going to call this big data gone wild, but this is a family resort. So big data gone bad. And we got a little arrogant after we started getting good at this stuff, and we set up all of these real-time alerts, right? We're like, oh, we are so on top of our data. Let's monitor everything and page people in the middle of the night if anything is even one sigma outside of the normal. And we got really just cocky. And so we set all this stuff up, and this was one of the first failures of that. So every game has this expected distribution of winners and losers, and the details are not important, but the axis there, the horizontal axis, is the ideal point for this particular game. And we launched it, and for 24 hours, it hovered right around the ideal point. And then after 24 hours, it started to go, the technical term for this is ape shit, where there were like really high highs and really low lows. And we thought that there was an exploit, a cheat. We were scouring. The best place to find people who are cheating in your games, by the way, is YouTube. You go to YouTube and you put in your game name, and you find some 12-year-old kid who's got a video on how to cheat at Wheel of Fortune. But so we're scouring and scouring and looking for the cheat and the exploit. And it wasn't until a couple days later that we realized this is actually what a win-loss distribution looks like in a game that has a heavy learning curve. So it has a heavy learning curve. In the first 24 hours, everybody's on par with one another. And then after 24 hours, you have some veterans who are 10, 20x better than the noobs. And then depending on how they get matched up, you're going to go wildly off of this ideal line. Okay, so it wasn't a failure of the game, it was a failure of our understanding of what's a good metric to monitor and what's a bad metric to monitor. So that's big data gone bad. That is not going to help with my quest to convert one of the 50 of you to rank this as an important thing to look at. So I'm going to move on to story number 4. So this is a fun one. One thing that happens, and again, if there's people who are experts in big data, unlike me and GSN, they probably are not as surprised by these things. But for us, these are all very fascinating and surprising topics. But so one thing we started doing was logging all navigation inside our apps. And particularly our web apps this is not page views and page clicks. This is a rich AJAX application with pull-down menus and sliders and carousels. So we just started instrumenting every single time anybody navigates around this web app in any way. And we were like, what are we going to do with that? I don't know, but let's just log it because it seems like a good idea. And 22 months after we started logging it, a member of our data science team came up with a new synthetic metric. So it's synthetic metric meaning you take some metrics that you're recording and you put them into a function together, and out you compute some new metric. And the synthetic metric he made up, just based on his own intuition, is time spent navigating but not actually playing a game. Okay? We'd never thought of that before, but he's like, I'm interested in what this is. And so it turns out that, so now we have this new synthetic metric, time spent navigating but not playing. It's a mouthful, but hopefully it makes sense. And this is for users' first sessions, time spent navigating but not playing on the X, and on the Y is their likelihood of returning the next day to play again. And what we discovered is crazy. There's this Goldilocks zone, right? You would expect that this would be monotonically increasing. You'd expect that the longer somebody is playing, the more they're enjoying, and so the more likely they are to return. But actually, and that's what happens if you look at game time, for instance. But actually, if you look at just this synthetic metric of navigating around but not playing, after a certain point, every incremental second that somebody spends futzing around with menus is actually damaging. Like they're less likely to come back. They're less likely to have fun and reward you with their continued use of your games. And so this was like a transformative finding for us, and is kind of part of our secret sauce now, which is why our legal team made me take out the tick marks on the axis and any reference to what time that actually is. But now what we do is we have control over the right tail of that distribution, right? And so we cut it off. So we say, hey, if you've been clicking around for too long, we're going to just force you into a game because we know that it's harmful to navigate for too long. So pop-ups and interstitials and, oh, play this, and we may or may not, like if you try to click on some more navigation elements, just pretend that you missed and actually clicked on a game. May or may not, I don't know. So, this was a really powerful finding, and what's so much fun about it is that we were recording this piece of data for 22 months before we actually took any action on it. And that's something that we find again and again and again. And every time that it happens, people get really excited. Our company makes millions of incremental dollars. But it's not all that rosy. I mean, it's important to realize that our data science team will look at 20 different synthetic metrics before they find one that's valuable, right? They'll try, time spent, scrolling but not playing, and that's meaningless, or any number of things. And there's truly an infinite number of metrics you can synthesize out of all the data, right? And so they'll just follow their intuitions, try one. It turns out to be weakly correlated or not correlated at all. And then about 1 out of 20 is something like this that's a real game changer for us. And the last story, is I think the most surprising. So we recently started logging mistaps. So you're trying to tap on a button on your iPad and you miss. You tap on, so there's nothing there, right? And originally we thought this would be useful for UI optimization, right? Are people missing the button by a few pixels? And something really surprising actually came out of it. So we have this video bingo game where you play a round of bingo. I hope everybody in the room knows what bingo is, right? B-I-N-G-O. So you play a round of bingo, and when you're done, this screen comes up. You won, and there's a button to play again. That continue button will play again. And what we learned is that power users will actually mash on the screen at the exact place where that button's going to appear before it appears. Okay? So they finish the game, and they're so excited to play the next game that they just they're tapping right there. And some people have actually managed to tap 12. That's the upper bound right now. 12 times. 12 times. There's about a 500 millisecond animation of tokens that's happening, and in those 500 milliseconds, they've tapped 12 times. But the normal is more like 3 or 4, 2 or 3 or 4. And so they're mistapping. They're tapping before the button appears. Okay, and here's where it gets crazy, is the number of early taps actually turns out to be a phenomenal predictor of customer churn. Okay, so each individual customer has their own sort of average of how many times they tap that button before the button appears. And as they get more and more bored with the game, that number declines. So for Mr. 12 or Mrs. 12, that 12 might fall to 11, to 10, to 9. And that's a signal to us as game creators that this person is fatiguing on the game. They're not enjoying it as much because they're only tapping 9 times in the 500 milliseconds. And then in other cases, it's 3 to 2 to 1. But for each individual customer, you can profile them and use this as a signal for how much they're enjoying the game. And then, of course, what we do is, as that's starting to fall, we take that opportunity to say, hey, do you know about our other games? Do you know about Tri-Peak Solitaire? Do you know about Bingo Bash? Like, we have 100 games, so we cross-promote the other ones at the exact moment that this signal is telling us they're getting less interested. And so these are the fun kinds of things that you get to do when you have a lot of data. And like I said, we're a bunch of game makers. Like, we just want to make fun stuff that people enjoy playing, and we kind of accidentally fell into this role of data science and big data. But hopefully, with a couple of these stories, I've convinced one of the 50 of you that there's something, that there's a there, right? That there's something interesting you can do. And for each person, for each industry, it's obviously very different. We're not all making games, but you'd just be shocked at how orthogonal these findings can be from what you think you're studying, right? So you're logging mistaps to try to move the button's XY position, and you stumble into this phenomenal predictor of customer churn. So it's really fun stuff. And the moral of the story is that you should just log everything. Data is so cheap. Like, our S3 bill is tens of thousands of dollars a month. And somebody on our team comes up with multi-million-dollar insights from that $10,000 a month data every week almost. So the ROI on this stuff is just phenomenal. So just log everything, and eventually smart people will find a way to make money off of that data. And it might take 22 months, it might take 48 months, but I've been pretty convinced over the last 3 years of, like I said, becoming an accidental data scientist, that the core thing is log it all. Log it all, keep it somewhere. For us, Vertica was a game changer in terms of being able to query, in our case, it's several trillion records in seconds or sub-seconds, and hire these smart people. Our data science team is comprised of ex-geologists, McKinsey consultants, physicists, mathematicians, all walks of life, and they just sort of follow their intuition and come up with these really interesting insights. I'll leave my contact info up here for 30 seconds or so. If you have any questions, I love to talk about this stuff. If you have any challenges, if you think this is baloney and doesn't work for your industry, I love to hear those kinds of stories as well, because worked in a lot of different industries, and my sense is that this stuff, this big data stuff, is really important, really valuable, and no matter what field you work in, can unlock a tremendous amount of value. So that's it. Thank you.